Israel and Indonesia have no formal diplomatic ties, although maintain some trade, tourism and security contacts. Whilst not openly opposed to Israel, Indonesia does not want to provoke the Muslims with a staunch opposition against Israel. On the 29th of March 2023, FIFA announced that Indonesia would lose its rights to host the 2023 FIFA Under-20 World Cup and a new country be selected instead. This is because of controversy over Israel's participation in the competition in Indonesia, which does not officially recognise Israel as a sovereign state. On the 7th of October 2023, Indonesia condemned Israel's bombing campaign against the Gaza Strip. Religion in Indonesia is regulated by the government. Indonesian Jews face the challenge of declaring a religion on their government ID cards called KTP, Kartu Tanda Penduduk. Every citizen over the age of 17 must carry a KTP, which includes the holder's religion. Indonesia only recognises 6 religions, none of which are Judaism. Reportedly, many Jews who have registered a religion have registered as Christians. The first time the presence of a Jew living in the Indonesian archipelago was confirmed in a written text in the late Middle Ages. This person was a merchant from Fustad in Egypt, who died in the port of Barus, northwestern Sumatra, in 1290. People of Jewish descent may have arrived in the region with the Portuguese in the early 16th century. Jews had fled to Portugal after their expulsion from Spain in 1492, only to be expelled from Portugal 4 years later when Portugal united with Spain. This went hand in hand with the persecution of Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. In 1511, a Portuguese force under the command of Alfonso de Albuquerque took over the city port of Malacca and paved the way for Lusitanian expansion in Southeast Asia. And most Indonesian Jews arrived from southern Europe, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, France, the Middle East, North Africa, India, China and Latin America. Between the two world wars, the number of Jews in the Dutch East Indies was estimated at 2,000. Indonesian Jews suffered greatly under the Japanese occupation of the Dutch East Indies and were interned and forced to work in labour camps. After the war, the released Jews found themselves without their previous property, and many emigrated to the United States, Australia or Israel. By the late 1960s, there was an estimated 20 Jews living in Jakarta, 25 Surabaya, and others living in Manado, East Nusa Tenggara, Maluku and Papua. An estimated 20,000 descendants of Jews still live in Indonesia, though many are losing their historic identity. Since most Indonesian Jews are actually Jews from southern Europe and the Middle East. The languages spoken by them include Indonesian, Malay, Arabic, Hebrew, Portuguese and Spanish. There was a synagogue in Surabaya, provincial capital of East Java. For many years, the only synagogue in the country. The synagogue became inactive in 2009 and no Torah scholars or rabbi. Since 2003, Shah Hashimayim synagogue has been serving the local Jewish community of some 30 to 50 people in Tondano City, Minahasa Regency, North Sulawesi. Currently it's the only synagogue in Indonesia that provides services. A tiny local Jewish community remains in the area, composed mostly of those who rediscovered their ancestral roots and converted back to Judaism. Yaptu Solicito Sojo Marano is an Indonesian politician who is known as leader of the Pancasila Youth, an organisation of quasi-official political gangsters that supported the New Order military dictatorship of Suharto. His father, EFKPN's Sotaro Sojomonaro, is a member of the Mangkunegaran Javanese nobility in Solo, whose palace I feature in a number of vlogs. His mother, Dolly Zagiras, who was of Jewish-Dutch origin, was a competitive contract bridge player and a naturalised Indonesian citizen. John Bernard Abraham Fortunas Mayo Polak, born November the 4th, 1904 to November the 30th, 1982, is a former member of the House of Representatives of Jewish descent and a member of the Masonic Order. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain was the expulsion of practising Jews following the Alhambra Decree of 1492, which was enacted to eliminate the influence of Spain's large converso population and to ensure that its members did not revert to Judaism. Over half of Spain's Jews had converted to Catholicism as a result of the massacre of 1391. Due to continuing attacks, around 50,000 more had converted by 1415, and many of those who remained decided to convert to avoid expulsion. As a result of the Alhambra Decree and the prior persecution, over 200,000 Jews converted to Catholicism, and between 40,000 and 100,000 were expelled. An unknown number returned to Spain in the following years. The expulsion led to mass migration of Jews from Spain to France, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and the Mediterranean basin. A wave of Jewish immigrants started to settle in Antwerp in the early 16th century, when the city became a relatively safe haven for crypto-Jews fleeing the persecutions and expulsions in the Iberian Peninsula. A tenuous presence was maintained over the next century and a half, although Jews were not allowed to acquire citizenship, and persecution was common under Spain's rule, and many Jews were expelled again. Some returned after the Peace of Westphalia. Around the turn of the century, the focal point of the world's diamond trade shifted from Antwerp to Amsterdam, bringing many Jewish diamond traders and polishers to the city. During World War I, many fled to the neutral Netherlands, but they returned after the war. The history of the Jews in the Netherlands largely dates back to the 16th and 17th century, when Sephardic Jews from Portugal and Spain began to settle in Amsterdam and a few other Dutch cities, because the Netherlands was an unusual centre of religious tolerance. The Portuguese Jews migrating to Amsterdam, many of whom were already merchants, had an extremely high literacy rate compared to the Dutch in the general Amsterdam population. Portuguese Jewish merchants had already settled in Antwerp, in the southern Netherlands, an entrepot for trade in the Iberian commodities such as sugar, silver bullion, spices and tobacco. These Jews from Portugal and Belgium, then southern Netherlands, moved to Leiden, Haarlem and Amsterdam in particular, following the sack of Antwerp, or the Spanish Fury, in 1576. This created something of an economic renaissance in the northern Netherlands, including the windmill-powered sawmill. This enabled innovations in ship design and building, ships known as fleet. Eventually this led to the Dutch to dominate the world shipping trade in imported luxury goods. Portuguese men had a narrow range of economic pursuits in the period, 1655 to 99, the largest being merchants at 72%, with 498 of the nearly 693 men whose occupation was listed in records. Adjacent to merchants were 31 brokers. There were skilled diamond cutters and polishers, 20 of them, a trade which had come with them from Spain, and the men connected to tropical products like tobacco, with 13 retail tobacconists and 13 tobacco workers. These trades, and particularly the diamond trade, also led to a boom in adjacent financial innovation and services, resulting in very low interest rates. Indeed, it was this innovation that eventually gave rise to the Dutch East Indies Company, financing the often risky business of international exploration and trade. Such was the success of these new financial services that Spain attempted to invite the Jews back, but it didn't work, and eventually Spain was bankrupted. Furthermore, the intellectual freedom led to a massive revolution, including the philosophers Descartes and Spinoza. The spice trade and control of the Spice Islands was under control of the Portuguese, and anyone wanting to venture within the Indian Ocean required a Cortes license. But the English privateer Christopher Newport in 1592 captured the Portuguese vessel, the Madre de Deus. The cargo proved to be extremely valuable to both Newport and the English treasury, alerting the world to the Portuguese lucrative profits. Dutch nationals Cornelius de Houtman and Jan Huygen Linschoten published a report on the Portuguese trade. It details what the Portuguese were traded in, their costs and their profits. It also contained details of the locations of the trade and anchorages. Cornelius de Houtman went on an exploratory mission in 1595 to capitalise on this information. Despite many tribulations, not least in Banten, despite being well received, the behaviour of the Dutch resulted in them being eventually turned away. Something of a paradox given the Dutch reputation for tolerance, which clearly didn't extend to swarthy natives. Only 1 in 4 initial ships returned, returning with the peppercorns he'd purchased in Bali, but were profitable. This gave way to a flurry of Dutch voyages following, eventually leading to displacement of the Portuguese and the establishment of a Dutch monopoly on the spice trading in the East Indies. Soon the Dutch would take over the spice trade in and around the Indian Ocean. Some wealthy Portuguese Jews in 17th century Amsterdam has houses amongst the very wealthy Dutch merchants and ship owners. The trade developed between the Dutch and the Spanish Caribbean and South America was established by such Iberian Jews. They also contributed to the establishment of the Dutch West Indies Company in 1620, and some of them sat on its directorate. Isaac de Pinto, a Jew of Portuguese origin, who in 1748 became director of the Dutch East Indies Company, and in 1749 of the Dutch West Indies Company, died in The Hague at 70 at the age of 70 on the date in 1787. The United East India Company, Verenigde Oostenrijkse Company, abbreviated to VOC, Dutch, commonly known as the Dutch East India Company, was a chartered trading company and one of the first joint stock companies in the world. Established on the 20th of March 1602 by the States General of the Netherlands, amalgamating existing companies, it was granted a 21-year monopoly to carry out trade activities in Asia. Shares in the company could be purchased by any citizen of the United Provinces, Dutch Republic, and subsequently bought and sold in open-air secondary markets, one of which became the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The company possessed quasi-governmental powers, including the ability to wage war, imprison and execute convicts, negotiate treaties, strike its own coins, and establish colonies. Also, because it traded across multiple colonies and countries from both the East and the West, the VOC sometimes considered to have been the world's first multinational corporation. Having been set up in 1602 to profit from the Maluku spice trade, the VOC established a capital in the port city of Jakarta in 1609 and changed its name to Batavia, now Jakarta. VOC headquarters were located in Ambon during the tenure of these first 3 Governor-Generals from 1610 to 1619, but it was not a satisfactory location. Although it was the centre of the spice production areas, it was far from the Asian trade routes and other VOC areas of activity, ranging from Africa to India to Japan. Nevertheless, trade with the British East Indies Company in India was much more significant to the VOC than direct import of spice to Europe, the profits being invested in land reclamation in the Netherlands. Over the next 2 centuries, the company acquired ports as trading bases and safeguarded their interests by taking over surrounding territory. It remained an important trading concern and paid dividends that averaged about 18% of the capital for almost 200 years. And much of the labour that built its colonies was from people it had enslaved. Initially, the VOC prohibited Jews from travelling to its holdings, especially its new headquarters in Batavia, on the pretext that it could not provide for their religious requirements. Although some Jews did travel, passing themselves off as Christians. Nevertheless, I do not want to overstate their impact on Indonesia, with the VOC preferring to import Chinese merchants. After 1730, the fortunes of the VOC started to decline. The new Batavia Republic nationalised the company 14 years later, and although its charter was renewed several times, it eventually expired in 1800. It was only after this time that the Dutch began to control larger and larger parts of the archipelago, attaining full control only at the beginning of the 20th century. The first post-VOC account of Jewish presence in the Dutch East Indies appeared as late as the 1860s. Slowly, the Dutch began to exert dominance over the collection of islands we now call Indonesia. Hence, Jews from the Netherlands had played an important, if forgotten, part in the creation of Indonesia.